year between high school and college, I went through treatment for an eating disorder, which there I really learned the depths of God's grace for me, and it wasn't about my performance because I fell flat on my face and all of who I held myself to be was gone. But that at the end of the day, it's really who Jesus is and who he says I am. That is the true gospel I can hold on to.
God definitely taught me that I can do more than I probably imagined with him, and that the weight of the world, even though it might feel like it's on my shoulders, it really isn't.
Welcome to the Extraordinary Lives podcast, where we talk about lives that go beyond the ordinary to the extraordinary, with the extra being Jesus. We'll be encouraged with amazing stories and helpful insights from the lives of ordinary people who have that extra, that supernatural difference that only Jesus can give. I'm your host, Ellen Bennett. Thanks for joining us. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome to the show Syd and Austin White. Syd has been a good, wonderful friend of my daughter Haley for many years. They are newlyweds and about to be parents of two and have many wonderful God stories to share with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's start with just telling us a little bit about your lives right now. What are you two up to currently?
Right now, we are bracing to become parents of two under two. So that looks like preparing our home. Looks like trying to sleep as much as possible and trying to make sure we're stocked up on food.
Yeah. So I'm almost 37 weeks pregnant at the moment, so he could come anytime.
That's right. And hopefully you're stocking up on some diapers as well.
Yes, we have those. They're good.
So tell us a little bit about Cameron, your firstborn.
Yeah, so Cameron's 16 months old. She came out with the loudest voice in the world, and that has held true. She is a firecracker, loves people, loves to play, is just a natural goof. She was really quite a surprise in the beginning, just with how difficult she was, but now that she's gotten older, she has, I think, more redeeming qualities that we can see that were harder to see in the newborn phase.
That will be very good to talk about later, too, just getting through hard times. It's so fun and amazing to be a parent, but also they always say the hardest job you'll ever do.
Yeah, it's been a ride, but I'm glad we have it with her.
Yes, and I will testify to just how amazingly adorable she is. She's just darling. And then we've got Bennett coming along, which of course is our last name, and we know that that's why you're naming the baby Bennett. But
that has been a common question, honestly, and it is not technically named after, the Bennett family.
Yes.
It could be.
That's right. We'll take it. We'll take it. And actually, I do love that name. For a boy name, I think it's darling.
That's good.
You all certainly didn't ruin the name.
No.
That is high praise, Austin.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, Austin, work-wise, and you too, Syd.
I am working in commercial insurance, doing account management things, and that is a total career change. I never pictured myself working, but that's where God led, mostly through my father-in-law, who also works there. I never would have foreseen that pivot coming so quickly after graduate school for counseling, but that's where God led me, and it's been a really good fit.
That is so good. We'll have to talk about that later too, just your heart for high school students and counseling them, and then how God has led you here to this point. Mm-hmm. And then Syd, what are you up to?
That is the question of the hour. So I'm a nurse by trade. Before we moved from Virginia, I was working in the hospital at the University of Virginia. Came at 6 or 7 months pregnant, so it was difficult to find a job, but I ended up finding a clinic in Oceanside, and I've been working there per diem, off and on, a little less currently. And then I was doing a telehealth position for about 6 months, but got laid off on that in October of this year. So now I'm just trying to figure out what to do with 2 kids under 2, and what do I have time for, and what can I do?
Yes.
So that's a big question we're don't have the answer for.
Yeah, that is a big decision, and one too that you're kind of in, maybe, I don't know if a holding zone is the right way to put it, but you're very pregnant, expecting your second, so it's nice to be able to just think about how does everything fit in now.
Yeah, it is definitely very hard to think about what could I or would I want to do for work when my brain is thinking about I'm gonna have a newborn in a couple weeks. It's been a weird spot.
Sure.
But where we're at.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your parents and where you grew up, and also how did you come to follow Jesus, to know Jesus?
So I grew up here in Carlsbad. My parents are Rick and Dawn. I've been known as Dawn's daughter my whole life. Now I'm Cameron's mom. It just continues on. Yeah, grew up here, and I just have always loved and felt like a gift of this area is the community I've had. And I'd say that's a big part of my story and my walk with the Lord, is just having a lot of wonderful people around me to support me and model what it means to be a follower of Christ. So I would say I, quote unquote, officially became a Christian by asking Jesus in my heart when I was 2 with my mom and my grandma. But I understood, I guess, what a 2-year-old understands about that, that I needed help, and Jesus was the answer to that. And then the rest of my life has been learning about that more deeply. I would say my faith really solidified more in middle and high school, where it was my own and something that I held on to and was part of who I was. Though I would say my faith was really legalistic, and though it wasn't taught to me, I just believe that if I follow these rules, then this is the outcome I will receive, which is not the gospel. But it took me, in my gap year between high school and college, I went through treatment for an eating disorder, which I would love to share more about later. But there I really learned the depths of God's grace for me, and it wasn't about my performance, because I fell flat on my face and all of who I held myself to be was gone. But that at the end of the day, it's really who Jesus is and who he says I am. That is the true gospel I can hold on to. There's nothing that God requires of me to then receive his love. He already gives it up front, and anything after is just because of who he says I am and who he is to me. That is now how my life is filtered, is through Jesus and not through what I do.
That is fantastic. And I just feel like as human beings, we are often human doings, and we just have that idea that we have to perform to be accepted, either by other people or by God. And I just feel like we can't hear this message enough of what the true gospel is. So thank you, Sydney.
Yeah, it was just naturally easy and already my bent, give me the things I need to do and I will do them to the nth degree. So it translated to my faith as well of, okay, well, if this is what it means to be quote unquote good or a Christian, then I'll just do them, and of course I will do them well. But
yes,
It's not about what you do, it's about the heart, and I'm still learning that, but definitely learned that a lot in my gap year.
That's awesome. Thank you. How about you, Austin? How did you come to have a relationship with God?
I grew up with a lot of different ideas of who God might be. My family is bicultural. My mom is from Southeast Asia. My dad is from Southwest Virginia. When you combine the two, you get quite the mix of faith backgrounds. So when I was coming out of high school, I would say that I had a curiosity about God, whether there was one, whether there was life after death. If there is a God, is there more than one? I was asking all sorts of questions because my faith upbringing did not answer any of those. It was very vague. It seemed like people were just trying not to offend others, and therefore ended up in kind of this spiritual but not religious community. And so what I noticed is I got to college, was still asking those questions, and had a lot more time and bandwidth to start finding answers. So I essentially started with the question, well, if we're here things have been created and we didn't create them. Somebody must have created them. And if there is a God, he must be all powerful if he could do that, which means he's ultimate. And ultimate means one. So since there's one, who is he? Or who is she? And so I started asking all these questions and found Christianity through fellowship at UVA. And it was the first time in my life I was able to ask about the things that I was offended by.
Good.
And get answers that were tangible through the Bible and through other men who I came to know as brothers in Christ.
That's great. Wow, that's exciting. Sounds like we could hear a lot more about that too. There's so much to our stories, isn't there? So tell me a little bit about how you met. That's a very fun story, especially since it takes place in Spain.
It does. Technically, we first met in a stairwell at the University of Virginia before our large group meeting.
Very romantic.
Yeah. But that's not the romantic part, so we usually skip over it. So we both happen to be...
Okay, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you. I think it's so interesting that your mom and dad basically met in an elevator in school.
Right.
And you guys met in a stairwell. That's hilarious.
We could have been in an elevator. There's an elevator next to the stairwell.
Yes.
But because we're active people, we took
There
the
we
stairs.
go. There we go. That's great.
Yeah, but the more fun story
Yes.
is we both were planning to study abroad in Valencia, Spain. Me after my first year of college, Austin after his second. And I had been briefly introduced to him in that stairwell by a good friend that just said, one of my friends, he'll look out for you. And I knew no one going in, so I thought, that's nice. One person I'll know, great. But yeah, right away, I think our first day there, he said, hey, you want to meet up to walk around the city, which it was my first time traveling internationally, so I thought being with someone was probably a smart idea. And we decided to meet up on this flower bridge called the Pont de Flores, which is now very special.
Mm-hmm.
But walked around the city for probably hours, and he was the first person that got me to talk about myself for I think the entire time, which is very rare. Most people have to pull stuff out of me painfully slow. So I thought that was different. At one point it started raining. It was kind of out of a movie. He was very gentlemanly and walked me back to my host family's apartment. And I right away wrote my mom, oh my gosh, I met this really great friend. And she said, what's his name?
I love that.
Love it.
So that's the more fun story.
Yes.
Yeah, it was certainly something out of a rom-com and had all the material for it.
That's great.
The only problem was I was dating somebody else.
Yes, I did
But
not
that could
know.
be part of the romantic comedy too.
Exactly.
The conflict.
Yeah, now years later. At
Yes,
the moment,
yes.
it was not very funny.
No, so therefore we were friends in Spain. I got home, ended that relationship, gave it a few months, and we started dating probably about a month before she realized it when we were back in Virginia at school. So we went on a lot of dates. She just didn't realize they were dates.
Yes.
Yes, you can make fun of me for that. I apparently was very clueless that Austin liked me a lot, and it was my brother who came up to visit, kind of said what was up, and I needed to pay attention.
Wow.
So we have Cole to thank.
Yes.
And pretty much the moment Cole left, Austin asked me to be his girlfriend.
Wow. That's exciting. Yes. Big shout out to Cole Saunders.
Exactly.
And here we are 6 years later with one kid and another one on the way.
That's right. Hey, well, I think that's a good segue into your transition from your job as a high school counselor. Is that correct? High school counselor?
So I was trained in a master's in counseling and then ended up working in social work. I was
Okay.
an adoption case manager here in San Diego and got to really experience some of the best and worst of people in that job.
Okay.
Yep.
So what did you train for when you were in college and in graduate school?
In undergrad, I majored in Spanish and Foreign Affairs, mostly just because I liked people and I liked talking, so a language sounded reasonable. And then my master's degree at UVA was in counseling with the option to do either mental health or school counseling. I ended up completing all of the coursework to qualify me for both in the state of Virginia. But when I got to California, I realized I was missing one course for mental health prerequisites because California loves to add extra taxes, extra classes,
Yes,
everything.
I know that as a teacher.
Special.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's the sunshine taxes and regulations really threw a wrench in that plan.
Yeah.
So I did not get the jobs I was hoping for and ended up working as a foster and adoption case manager, which taught me a lot.
Okay, tell us about that job.
So that job entailed working with children who were already removed from dangerous situations and being placed into foster homes. And so on any given day, I could get a call and find out, okay, there's 2 children, they need a home, let's contact our foster parents. And that was enormously emotionally draining. It was beautiful to watch children come into a safe environment and over the course of several months or even a year become comfortable with their caregivers. What was heart-wrenching was seeing things not work out. When people would receive a foster child into their home and end up wanting to send the child somewhere else. Or monitoring a visitation between a child and their biological parent who they've been removed from and seeing the aftermath of that was particularly difficult.
Wow, that does sound really hard.
Yeah, it was a job that has made everything else since then seem pretty easy.
Yes. What would you say your takeaways from that, and what do you think God taught you during that time? Any reflections on that?
I got into that field to serve people, and God taught me that there are many ways to serve people regardless of your vocation. I frankly felt burnt out towards the end of that job and was exhausted from even just the mere anxiety of being on call 24/7, getting calls about horrible things on our anniversary. It was tiring. But God definitely taught me that I can do more than I probably imagined with Him, and that the weight of the world, even though it might feel like it's on my shoulders, it really isn't. While I might be involved in a process, like a court process or a big decision about a child's life, that I'm not responsible for the outcome. So
That's good.
God helped me to loosen my grip and relinquish control over the outcome of things in general.
Wow, that's huge, really. And I can tell that God has given you such a heart for others and people in need. So that's sweet to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. You married a good one, Sydney.
He's very tender. I also think I love serving people, which is how I got into nursing, because it was a practical way to love people. And that was something that drew me towards Austin, was also his heart for service as well. In whatever he does, he just wants to love on people and serve them and meet their needs, whether that's, a breakfast burrito or a hug or whatever. And I just love that about him.
That's wonderful. And I'm going to hold you to that hug and breakfast burrito.
I think the breakfast burrito was selfishly for me, but I'm happy to share.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's really wonderful. I love that you two have that in common.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
We've both worked really difficult jobs that are physically and emotionally taxing.
Yes.
And I think that has made a lot of other things in life, frankly, seem easier.
Wow.
It's toughened us.
Wow. It's amazing.
Except for Cameron.
Cameron's a tough
She
one.
was different.
Yes. For those of you who don't know, Cameron can scream for very long periods of time.
It's not a nice baby cry. It
Yes.
is a scream like someone is hurting her.
It can
Yes.
break a wine glass.
Yes.
But,
And I will say that sometimes she actually screams too out of being excited.
yeah, that's more now.
Yes,
But in the
yes.
beginning, it was only, level 10, everything is miserable, breaking glass.
Yes. This is a good time for you to tell us about why you're naming your baby Bennett Paxton.
Yes. So Bennett Paxton means blessed peace when you put it together. And it is honestly a prayer for mercy, because we just had a lot be overwhelming around Cameron's birth, and then even Cameron herself was overwhelming. And I thought I was very prepared, because I was a mother-baby nurse. This is my sweet spot, was babies and newborns. And she was anything but blessed peace. There was no peace about her. So, and the scream just was an added layer that, we got through it. So, in thinking about what to name our little boy who's coming, we wanted, honestly, it's just a prayer for peace and blessing, and knowing that, however God has made him, that he already is a blessing. The peace part is probably more the prayer.
Yes, that's great. Yeah. And how amazing to weather that together. I mean, that's the kind of situation that can either really push you apart or draw you together. I would think it would lead to having to really serve the other when you might just want to be more selfish and say, hey, I need some time. Absolutely. How did that work out?
As a new father, I expected to be more hands-off. I thought, mom's got it. Baby is only able to eat from her. Baby's, only able to be soothed by her. I'm just going to relax and sit back and stay out of the way. Then I realized that was not and now have accepted that when I come home from work, I'm going to have to work again. And it's a different kind of work until that child goes to bed. And this time around, until both go to bed.
Yes.
So I think something that helped us close that gap or that wedge between us early in parenthood was just me being humbled and learning I'm going to have to work a little harder because my wife's picking up way more than I realized.
Wow.
Yeah, and probably my flaw as well is I can take on a lot and not ever ask for help, and no one would know the difference that I actually need it. Mm-hmm. So that dynamic definitely played out a lot in the beginning, just because we were trying to survive. And I think it was a couple months down the road we realized it probably shouldn't continue on like this. Like, one of us is going to burn out and the other one is going to feel left out, and that's no good.
Yeah.
So definitely a lot of trial and error, and I think we're in a good groove now.
Wow, that's great.
And enough to have it change in, a couple weeks.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Come talk to us in 2 months. And see
All
how
right, that sounds good.
Am I asking for help?
Yes. I do live close by.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your eating disorder and what you learned from that, because it just seems like God took a really yucky thing and just was able to bring so much good out of it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it feels far removed from now. It's been about 8 years, I think, 8.5. But some things are definitely still very fresh. So I would say I probably had an eating disorder off and on from middle school, but it became really apparent my senior year of high school. There was a lot of stressful stuff going on at home. I was applying to schools. I had convinced myself the only way I was going to afford college was to run on a cross-country team. So I was training like there was no tomorrow on top of everything. So I graduated high school, and instead of going off to college, stayed here for a year, went through treatment for 4 months. It was intensive, outpatient, and then kind of spent the rest of the year relearning how to do life and relearning what to believe and what to think, because I had these things I held true in my head that really weren't, and I had to learn what they were. And I'm so thankful that I had not only the professional eating disorder treatment team, but I had a lot of people from my community and from Seacoast come around me and walk through like freedom in Christ and just changing my brain to believe what God actually says instead of what I had told myself he says. So I had twofold. I had like a spiritual recovery and a eating disorder recovery. And it was, a really awful year, especially because I had thought I was going off to college like everybody else, and then I didn't. So that was just like one small piece of the identity of Sydney Saunders I had held on to that I had to let go and trust that God had something in it and I couldn't see. And we were talking this morning of that has kind of been my theme over the last apparently several years that I thought I had learned. But like trusting God in the unknown when I can't plan anything or it doesn't make sense, but knowing that God has something in it and I have to trust who he is through that, even when it'd be better if I could do it myself. So
I think you already referred to some of the lies you were telling yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe it was about you're performing a certain way and then God would answer a certain way. Any more insights from that time?
Yeah, so part of my eating disorder brain that then translated into other things was my equation was A plus B would equal C. So that was in my faith, that was in running, that was in food. And all those I learned were lies and just ways that I was trying to control something that I can't. Whether that be a race or getting into a certain school or God loving me anymore. I was telling myself if I did this, this was the outcome. And so going through recovery was learning that that was actually untrue. But then aside from unlearning the lies I believed was learning what was true. So one that sticks out to me is a truth I had to learn and tell myself a lot was God is in control, so I don't have to be.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think I need to tell that to myself every day and believe it.
Yeah. So that, I guess, the eating part was more that first year, and then I went off to school the following year, which was honestly a miracle. And then it was learning, like, how do I live out recovery on my own? How do I live out recovery in transition, which was my time of wanting to control and go back to the under-eating and over-exercise pattern that I did. And I just think God showered me with love in ways I shouldn't have had. Like, if we're going to go from the point of I did all this wrong, so then I shouldn't receive these blessings. I was told I would never run again. Anyone who knew me in high school knew that I was the girl with allergies or health problems or something, and that was just such my identity. And apparently eating normally makes your body recover and have a lot of those things go away. So I didn't have any of the health problems I had prior to treatment. I got to run at the University of Virginia in a healthy way on the club cross country team, which was competitive but not overboard. I got to go to Spain and try new foods, which I would have never done. And then another big blessing was even Cameron and Bennett themselves, because I was told I probably wouldn't have kids based off of just how much damage had been done to my body. And so any kid we have is just such a testament to God being abundant when he didn't have to be. When anything I did would have led to a natural consequence, but instead he met me over and above what I could have asked for.
That's phenomenal. Thanks for sharing that. Are there any signs that people should look for in others that might point to an eating disorder? Or does it just look really different for each person?
It can look different. There are probably people more knowledgeable about this than me, but I did learn a lot even in treatment that there kind of is a type, especially there's this thing called the female athlete triad, where you are an athlete usually in a highly competitive sport like cross-country swimming, gymnastics, already an overachiever in school, so get good grades, kind of the kids you really want to be in your class or on your team. And it's just that extra, because you can be a good student and a good athlete and have no eating disorder, but there's this extra thing of control or anxiety or just trying to get a certain outcome and it being a really big deal if you don't. I think too stressful times or seasons can really bring it on, because I would say I had one kind of off and on, but it never really got bad. I managed it well. And then just all that overachiever plus family stress plus trying to get into college stress just all culminated into what was already there coming forth. So I will say, if you are struggling with an eating disorder, know that there is freedom and you don't have to live that way. I had people tell me that and I laughed in their face, and now I can go, oh my gosh, thank goodness I don't live like that anymore. And then if you know someone that if you say something, they probably will get mad, and it's not them talking to you anymore, it's the eating disorder. My parents can attest to that, probably some friends too, but they were concerned and asked if everything was okay, and what do you mean? Yeah, everything is okay. But it's just that eating disorder brain overlay that is talking at that point and not the real true person who does need help.
That is great insight. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so we're nearing the end here, and I would love to find out, is there anything else you want to share, any God stories, or are there any insights you've been having lately that you would love the listeners to know about, or anything with a relationship with God that you want to make sure people know?
In particular, having children has helped me to understand, probably more deeply than I've ever felt, how God sees me. I grew up thinking that God was very distant, thinking that he's kind of this amorphous, bearded sky daddy, far away.
Yes.
And not really trusting that he cared about the little things. But the Bible says that, his thoughts of us outnumber the grains of sand, and that's a lot. That God knows me intimately, whether I choose to acknowledge him or not. So when I look at my daughter, I am starting to understand that that is just a fraction of how God looks at me. And that I can come to him safely with every misstep, with every fear, with every doubt. And that he will welcome me with open arms and is not vindictive, is not going to lash out in anger, but instead is going to be a father who says, my son, you're welcome here. My son, I love you. My son, my promises are true. I can be trusted. So I would say that if you're struggling with your relationship with God, have kids.
That's great. I love it. And I'm thinking about that Cameron hasn't been the easiest baby, but you wouldn't trade her for anything, and you love her so very much. You couldn't imagine life without her. So that's a great picture, too, that you just have such a strong bond. I have been reading Henry Nouwen's book about the prodigal son, which he wrote about. Yes. So he wrote about Rembrandt's painting of the father hugging the prodigal son, who has come back in a very humble way because he took the father's inheritance and just spent it all. And he realizes, I am up a creek. I've got to just go home. I'll be my dad's servant. And so when he goes back, his father actually welcomes him with those open arms, and it's just a beautiful hug. And I'm excited to just read more about that and just really ponder that more and even really picture that in my life, that God has his arms around me, just hugging me, no matter what. I mean, that was after the prodigal son had basically, when he took that inheritance, had basically said to his dad, you're dead to me. I don't care about you. But then when he comes back, the dad has that full mercy and love and grace. So those are really, I think, important reminders, important thoughts, important truths to ponder. Thank you.
Of course.
How about you, Sydney?
I would tag off Austin with motherhood. I think I've learned more deeply how fearfully and wonderfully he truly has created us. I think maybe you get a better idea of that as a mom. You get to experience them kicking and growing and moving around in your belly, and I just think that's so awesome that I have no idea what he's going to look like or be, but God already does. And he has that for each one of us. He knows exactly who we are. He made us intentionally. I had to remember that a lot with Cameron, that he made her intentionally.
Yes.
Even the scream. And I think another truth I've held on to is that God has made Cameron for me and then me for Cameron.
Yes.
And there's a purpose in it, and it's not a mistake, because sometimes I feel very much out of my ability and feel like, oh, this must be a mismatch or a mistake because I don't know how to do this. But it doesn't change the fact that God made us both for each other, and he's there with me in the times that I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I guess another thing I continue to learn is trusting God in the unknown. I think both of us have felt like the last 2 years have looked really, really differently than we expected, almost in every regard. Me with nursing, it just changed so much, and I was kind of discouraged by it when we left UVA. Our time here has been different and involved a career change for Austin already. We already have 2, which is different than we expected.
Yeah.
And I think there have been a lot of moments where things have changed suddenly and we don't know why, and ultimately have to trust that God does know why, and that there is purpose, and that He's with us. Like Austin was saying, He's not far off and distant. He's not surprised, but He's here with us even when it feels really overwhelming and confusing.
And marriage has been a picture of that for me, because I really have struggled in the past to trust in other people. And I trust Sydney more than I trust anybody in the world. And how much more perfect is God than her and than me? And so being able to kind of bear through all of the challenges of the past 2 years with each other and know that we always have the other to turn to me has taught me how to turn to God, because how much better is He than Sydney?
Yeah, very much better.
And I love how God has made people to be that tangible hug and reminder of who He is and His love. So that's great too. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your hearts with us today. And I just love your story and your continuing story. And I can't wait to meet Bennett.
Me neither.
Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Ellen Bennett with the Extraordinary Lives podcast.